This is grade 5, module 6, lesson 6, and the objective in this lesson is to investigate patterns in vertical and horizontal lines and interpret points on the plane as distances from the axis. Okay, and we're going to be looking at homework problem number 2, and it starts out with construct line M such that the y-coordinate of every point is 1.5, and construct line N such that the x-coordinate of every point is 5.5. So let's look at line M first. So for line M, it says that every y-coordinate is 1.5. So if x is, let's say x is 1, then y would be 1.5. If x is 3, y would be 1.5. If x is 4.5, y would still be 1.5. So I drew some points right here, and all you're going to do is connect those points to create a straight line. Okay, and then we'll label that M. And then N is a line where the x-coordinate of every point is 5.5. So we start out with going over to 5.5. Okay, so I made some points where all of the x-coordinates would be 5.5. So it would be 5.5 and 0, 5.5 and a half, 5.5 and 1, and we have here we have 5.5 and 3.5, and 5.5 and 4.5 would be right there. So we're going to take those dots and we're going to connect those points as well. Okay, and I'm going to label that line as N. Okay. So line M is blank units from the x-axis. So the x-axis would be right here, and we're looking at line M. So line M is 1.5 units away from the x-axis. So it would be 1.5. Part B says give the coordinates of the point on line M that is 2 units from the y-axis. Okay, so the y-axis runs vertically here, and we want a point on line M that's 2 units away. So it would be right here, and the coordinates for that point would be, let me put it in here, 2 and 1.5. Remember, all of the y coordinates on line M is 1.5. Okay, and C says, with a blue pencil, shade the portion of the grid that is less than 1.5 units from the x-axis. Okay, so it would be what's below line M. And then we're going to look at D, and it says line N is blank units from the y-axis. So if we look at where the y-axis is here, and we want to know how far away line N is, that would be 5.5 units. So that would be our answer here. Okay. E says give the coordinates of the point on line N that is 3.5 units from the x-axis. So we're looking to be 3.5 units here. So 3.5 units from the x-axis on line N, which would be right there. So those coordinates would be 5.5 and 3.5. So let's write it in here. Okay, in the parentheses because it's a coordinate. Now it says with a red pencil, shade the portion of the grid that is less than 5.5 units from the y-axis. Okay, so that would be everything to the left of line N. That would be less than 5.5 units from the y-axis. Okay, so let's look at the next homework question, and that's going to be homework question number 4. And it says complete the following tasks on the plane. Using a blue pencil, shade the region that contains points that are more than 2.5 units and less than 3 1/4 units from the y-axis. Okay, so there it is there. It's more than 2.5 units and less than 3 1/4 units. So now we're going to use a red pencil and shade the region that contains points that are more than 3 3/4 units and less than 4.5 units from the x-axis. Okay, there it is. And then C says plot a point that lies in the double shaded region. So that's going to be anything within this region here. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to say 3 and my y would be 4. So 3, 4 would be right about, let's see if I can make a dot there. Be right about there, which falls in the double shaded region.